remarks to start?
I do have some answers to some questions that were previously asked. In April, there was a question concerning the PA risk and vulnerability assessment team. The questions specifically were, will the assessment address all 5 schools? Who will the district consider using, or would the district consider using a private entity? Has the PVOT assessment ever been done in the district? Who will be the point person? And who will make recommendations after the assessment? Part of the agreement of the assessment was the district would not share all of the details. This is for security reasons. Assessments have been done at all levels. Assessments were previously done on numerous occasions beginning in January of 2007.
Excuse me, Michelle, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can you just tell me where you're reading from, which month?
If you go to page 2,
okay.
It'll start, it says April 3rd, 2018.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So sorry.
You're welcome. The Director of Security has coordinated the assessments with local and state police. The district is open to having a private security company do an additional assessment, and recommendations from the assessment will go to the superintendent for evaluation. In April, there was also a question regarding the stormwater hookup for the middle school, and if it had been certified to show that it's working at 100% capacity. Per Mr. Stitzel, the stormwater hookup for the middle school is working. It has not, however, been certified to show that it's working at 100%. And there have been no issues with water in the building since the hookup occurred. There was also a question regarding former employees and why they should receive a discounted rental fee, and a suggestion that Radnor resident rental should require that a percentage of the participants be from Radnor. The district is currently in the process of reviewing the facility rental procedures and will bring a recommendation to the facilities committee in the future. Rental classifications will be reviewed during this process. There was a question regarding why the district would not comment on modifying the tri-party agreement. As previously stated, the district will not comment on this issue at the current time. In the event that there is something new to report on this issue, the district will respond to the question. There was also a question regarding the scoreboard at Tennell Field and if it was necessary and if neighbors had been consulted. That question was answered at the May meeting when district administration was directed to work with the Radnor Little League regarding the scoreboard. There was also a question in May regarding whether or not the township or sports group will continue to contribute toward the cost of turf replacements at Radnor High School. In 2015, the district signed an agreement with Radnor Soccer Club, Radnor Youth Lacrosse, and Radnor Girls Lacrosse for the groups to pay $165,000 towards the cost of field expansion and an additional $165,000 towards the cost of a field replacement on Yankee Field. The district received $330,000 from the groups in July of 2015. This current agreement will be reviewed over the summer, and the district is open to options to share the cost of turf replacement in the future. What plans have been developed to mitigate the effect of traffic increasing with Penn development across from Radnor High School? The district has had various meetings with Penn and has expressed concerns regarding traffic and traffic lights. The final approval of these plans will be done by the township. There was also a question about the bleachers at Radnor High School and why they do not need to be ADA compliant. The current bleachers at the high school are not ADA compliant due to when they were installed. The replacement bleachers will be ADA compliant. There was a question regarding an update to the lunch pilot tray program that was being done. Compostable trays were introduced at the elementary buildings in November of 2017. The trays initially used were rectangular and they weren't very sturdy. In the winter, the district began using a round tray, which was well received by students and staff. The pilot was expanded to the high school in late April 2018 with favorable results. Paper trays are not currently being utilized at the middle school, and over the summer the district would do an analysis of the pilot to determine if the trays will be used in 2018-19. Will the district get competitive bids for the roof at Ithan? The district is currently in the process of gathering information regarding the repairs needed for the roof at Ithan. Once the district has all the information, it will decide how to proceed. There was a question regarding why the district owns Tanel Field with no compensation for the township, from the township for using it. The district currently has a lease agreement with the township, which includes a $1 fee remitted annually. In May, there was a question regarding how and why the district had 3 non-working trucks and how they would be advertised. The 3 maintenance vehicles were severely rusted and deemed unsafe by district mechanics. The vehicles were traded in. There was a suggestion that the district should evaluate and implement using 3-point seatbelts on all school buses. According to our Director of Transportation, Mr. John Hearn, most organizations dedicated to student transportation oppose mandatory seatbelts, including the National Association for Pupil Transportation, the National School Transportation Association, and the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation. With our fleet location and transportation requirements, the district believes compartmentalization is the safest mode for our students. This design concept minimizes the impact of a collision. Raised back seats, extra padding, and energy-absorbing steel structure combined with elevated passenger deck contribute to making the school bus one of the safest vehicles on the road.
Can one of those topics, I don't know where you want to talk about it. I had a follow-up question.
Sure.
Do you want to do it now?
Yeah.
So I just have one follow-up question, which actually has been in the back of my mind, and I have completely forgotten about it until you rattled through these. Very much appreciate the answers to the questions, quite frankly. And I hope that the people who ask them will find them to be adequate. The question that I had was around the turf field. So at the time that we did the agreement on the turf field replacement, we had those parties come in here, we talked about it in public meetings, we voted on it publicly. I know we received the funds, we've done the turf field. Part of that discussion, my recollection, and I'll have to go back and pull my notes up to have specifics, was that at that time, at the time the turf fields were put in 2003, the turf field organization that started themselves started putting money into the Vanguard fund, and they were collecting funds and leaving it in there, and that's where they came up with the $300 and some odd thousand that they provided to us. At the time of that discussion, because we had a lot of difficulty in having an agreement with them about how those funds were going to be managed, monitored, whether we would have visibility to them, what access we would have to them, all of the above. And part of the big $300,000 was that it was supposed to deplete those funds fairly nearly to nothing. And that we were going to start to engage in some sort of an annual contribution towards turf replacement that the district was going to manage. And or I knew there were some, at the time we talked about it because there was some, a separate organization has more ability to invest differently than we do, because I know our hands are somewhat tied about how we invest. And there was nothing wrong with what they were doing, and it was just that we had no visibility or access to it. All things were well, nothing nefarious ever happened, but it was uncomfortable that we didn't have a written agreement with the organizations with regards to the replacement funds in the future. And I thought we were going to eliminate that. Either they were going to pay us on some sort of a regular basis, and those funds would be put into a separate account for future turf replacement, or we were going to have a written agreement with them as to how those funds, how they were going to invest the funds, and that we would get some sort of an annual accounting of it, and that there was some agreement about how those funds would be dispersed. And I don't remember where we left that off. So I would like to circle back to kind of where we're going with that.
Makes sense.
We can look into that. I actually just pulled the agreement and looked at it this morning, so we definitely need to review that, revisit that agreement, and that's something that we need to look into.
Yeah, because they never really signed an agreement per se.
No, there was a signed agreement.
With the $300,000.
$300,000.
Okay.
There's also a reference in that agreement about how that $330,000 came about.
Right.
So half of it was for the expansion of the field. I imagine in the future,
Right.
the expansion would not be included as part of what they're going to reimburse, and the district would have to come up with some sort of agreement regarding the replacement, just solely of the turf.
Yeah, because with as much money as it is, we really should have some sort of agreement, and I would personally prefer to see some sort of annual or whatever, either them giving us the money or at least giving us some visibility to what's there so that we know what's going on. No surprises, right? Okay, sorry, thank you, I forgot all about that and, okay.
Is that all you got?
That's it.
Do you have anything? Ken? No. Okay. Public comment? You've all been here before, so did you sign in on the sides?
Sure.
You can do it after.
Hi, I'm Colleen Price.
You can just push the button.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Colleen Price, a member of the Environmental Advisory Council. I came here, I guess, a couple of months ago, talking about solar panels for the high school. I see your agenda is jammed, and we're not trying not to put any more burden on you. So we just wondered if, as the Environmental Advisory Council, could we just gather some preliminary information? Pretty much all I need to know is what the electric bill is for the high school, which I pulled off the budget. And if the number there is correct, I could at least get 2 companies, maybe 3, to give you just an idea of what it would cost and how long it would take you to make your money back, and just you can do the official public bid process and request a proposal later.
So when you brought that up, I also reminded everybody here that we
Yeah.
have solar panels on Radnor Elementary School.
Right.
And I thought we were gonna go back and pull up our historical data about, whether we're using them, what the experience has been.
Okay.
So we are going to look at that. It will be the month of August. We were going to do it this month, but Mr. Stitzel's not able to join us. He's enjoying his daughter's graduation this evening. So we will look at that again in August.
Okay, yeah, it'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's weird. I know I can
I know.
correspond with email back and forth with you and all that.
Being
And
a
there's
bank.
issues with us being a government entity. We can't take the tax credit, so if we put the panels on,
Right.
we have to enter into a power purchase agreement with somebody else who finances and owns them, basically rents them
Right.
back to them. So, and then under the law, we have to get at least 3. A friend of mine's the CEO of a solar company. So,
Right.
it's not that I know this off the top of my head. So, like she said, we'll probably revisit this in August.
So is there any
we'll
way
be in touch with you.
can we help you to do it rather than put the whole burden on you to go get all the information?
I don't know. I'll be in touch with you, or Michelle will be in touch with you. We'll
Okay.
discuss and see how we want to go.
Okay.
I mean, ideally, we would look at what our experience is at Radnor Elementary first, right?
Yeah, I think that's our first step, and we wanted to just look at it, and Mr. Stitzel had contacted our operations group to look at what does that experience be, to bring it back here to this group to discuss that, and I think this group in August can talk about then what our next steps would be.
Okay. All right, great, thank you.
Right.
Anyone else?
Hello, Judy Sherry, Governor's Circle. Why were the agenda and very limited attachments for this meeting not posted until yesterday? Why not indicate the delay on the home page? What happens is, because they're typically posted on Friday, if you're a citizen here, you go on the website and you click all the way through, then you think, oh, maybe I did something wrong because I'm in Word docs and nothing's popping up for this meeting. And so at the very minimum, you should put something on the homepage that says we're not getting the information up until Monday or something, because that's pretty late. So it's disappointing. Regarding the stormwater situation, I had asked why we didn't have a representative at the commissioners meeting. Now it sounds like today from the report that we're not getting any water inside the building. Is that acceptable? Are we at a level now on South Wayne Avenue that the school district is very satisfied with how the stormwater is running along that avenue? And because there's certainly been a lot of fees collected, and if any of that money can go toward improving the situation, that would be great. But if you're all satisfied with it, then it should go elsewhere. So That was really my question. Is the district satisfied with the status quo? Back to asking if there's any board interest in holding a joint meeting over tri-party, stormwater, the trail, and open space. And also this Penn Medicine development. I don't know if any of you purchased a copy of the Suburban, but there was a picture of the development. It is very extensive, and I think it's going to impact our transportation, our high school at the minimum, I think Radnor Elementary School probably, and you know, it's always easier to deal with problems when they're not like right there. So what I heard sitting with the report is that the township will sign off on the traffic. Well, we should be, the school district should be at the table talking about this, because, you know, I don't see how it isn't going to impact us in a considerable fashion. So I would think that that would be something that should be discussed. The rusty trucks, I mean, I don't know, do we have shelter for these vehicles if they just are rusty and that's the problem? I don't know, how do they get to be rusty, 3 trucks? So, it seems expensive to me. It seems like we should get some sort of cover for the trucks if they're getting wet or something. Buses with seat belts. Yeah, I know that there's a discussion about, I guess it's called compartmentalization, to keep students in narrow seats. But when you have the National Transportation Safety Board endorsing seat belts, the National PTA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think they're pretty important organizations in the country, and if they're saying that they recommend that all new buses have 3, it's called 3-point seat belts, so that they're lap and shoulder and lap. You know, I just go back to, if you reflect about how you take your children home from the hospital, you know, you practically need to strap them in or they won't let you get out of the hospital. Then they're in these incredible seat belts until I don't know what age, but I'm strapping kids in, and I know it's a 15-minute ordeal just trying to get the belts in place. And we put them on school buses, and all of a sudden they're safe, you know, if they're hit and the bus flips over. I just don't understand it. And I think it's a pattern of behavior you want to encourage, so that wherever you go, you feel you should put a seatbelt on. So I think that this is something the board should look into. I didn't know if I heard an answer about multiple architects for the bleacher project. I don't think I heard an answer on that. That's just on past issues. I heard about Inland Snail. I don't know where we stand with that in terms of the scoreboard. I heard that there was, I wasn't following that response. And just finally, the main topic this afternoon is elementary enrollment capacity review discussion, clearly an important topic, yet the following was posted yesterday online. Presentation will not be available until the day of the meeting in order to share the most current information. And even today at 11:45, nothing was posted. Now, this sounds really ridiculous. Is it possible that a meaningful change in enrollment information was likely to occur between yesterday and today? Or how about building capacity? Did that change? How can board members or the public be prepared for a discussion when they are presented with information at the meeting itself, and especially the public with only limited participation opportunities? So that's disappointing because it's an important issue. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Cindy Spurtle, Wayne. Just a couple questions on the, thank you for all the answers to all the questions, or most of the questions. On the bleachers, I understand are not ADA compliant now, and they will be when they are replaced. Will replacement be within a year? Or I know we're talking to different architects and contractors, so we're they're fixing them up. It just seems that make them ADA compliant during the time this summer when they're school district is doing a paint job or whatever, that something could be done at that point to, is it possible to make them ADA compliant? I would think that would be an important item if we're going to be waiting a year or two before a decision is made on the architects and the timing of the replacement. On the explanation I missed, I was trying to write everything down quickly for the replacement fields, the turf and the breakdown of the $165,000 for expansion and for replacement, that makes up the $330,000 in the past. But there is still no contract for the talks we're now having concerning the replacement field in the future. Is that the contract that you're now talking to the clubs about?
So we haven't started those discussions with the clubs.
So these figures were
It was for the previous replacement at Enki and expansion.
okay.
What is proposed to be replaced is Prevost, and for the most part, the district is the one that uses Prevost and not those outside groups. For the most part, they use Enki Field.
So the replacement field is something that the district is going to, the expense for that, which I think I saw was a lot more than the $330,000 that was contributed for these two fields. The price has gone up. One other comment.
So can I just make one comment on that?
Yes.
The $330,000 was roughly half
Yeah,
of the
half
cost
of
of the
the
project. So they weren't funding 100%, the district was funding the other half.
Yes,
So
that
what
I
you're
know.
seeing for Prevost is 100%.
And that's
That
around
just-
600, isn't it, 600,000
Around 600
plus?
plus.
That's just one field, though, no extension involved in that of another field.
That field is
Correct.
actually larger
Than
than
Enki.
Enki was.
Michelle, you're on.
Still a lot of. Going through the agenda, which I too had a quick comment on, because I think I was shocked at the note on the agenda item number 4 for tonight's agenda, since there's only one item to be discussed in today's meeting, and that's the presentation of the elementary enrollment building capacity. So I too would like to concur, agree with, highly support the shock and it's just ridiculous to make a comment like that. It makes us think that, again, tomorrow the information's going to change. Why one day makes a difference on information. And getting the handouts for tonight, I noticed that it's the same report that I was using for my review of the numbers, which was presented in March. So I'm waiting to hear from Dr. Labarchuk. I understand there's a reason for that. But for people who care about the committee meetings, the board meetings, and want to prepare, not having any information for the discussion of the main item of the agenda is not a good way
Trish, you're looking very cool.
Oh, yes. New look. Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road in Rosemont. And I would just like to again commend Ms. Decal for her fine answers to many of the questions that have been raised here. I know it's not always easy to dig into all these facts and figures. And I would just hope that as you look at the facilities usage and enrollment in the district, particularly at the elementary school, but overall, to really try to think out of the box as ways to solve these problems that may not include things like increasing class size. And this is always a problematic issue when enrollments are unequal, and we need to consider things like redistricting. I've been here before, we've done it 2 or 3 times in my lifetime, and it's never easy. And I think it's important that we try to think outside the box, because I think there may be some potential opportunities for us to solve the problem once and for all. But you really have to make some commitment to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, approval of the minutes? Does anybody have a problem with the minutes? Okay. So we'll move on to the big agenda, and you guys are up.
And as they come in, just for the board, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. We did have a computer error on the side of board docs on Friday that we realized Monday morning with the posting of our documents. So there was an error message that was there. So things were posted, we thought that they would be there, but then there was a glitch on the side with board docs with that posting. That's why board members are able to receive paper copies. Monday morning it was corrected, in working with board docs, but I think the suggestion tonight of putting something on our website to let people know about that is not a bad idea. So we'll look into that in the future when it happens. There's still, board docs has been a good opportunity to organize things, but there has been still some growing pains as we move forward to that new format. And I just wanted to mention too, we can respond to other questions next month, but that the district has that opportunity to have a seat at the table when we look at the property on King of Prussia Road and to discuss traffic. We have had opportunities, and board members have had some opportunities to discuss that and give input on that.
So I'd like to have that opportunity, especially since I live in the neighborhood. And I've not been offered the opportunity to sit in on those discussions. I really feel those discussions need to be back here in front of the group of us. No, so when we had the Penn discussion and the agreement with the 145 property and the move forward, we were told that we were going to get the opportunity to participate in the planning and the traffic element of it as part of the cycle, of the township's move forward cycle. So where have we had that discussion? Because I've not.
Here, we had like a whole bunch of.
No, that was prior to us agreeing with them on the move forward of that property. Where's it?
So let me do that. Let me do this because there have been opportunities, but let me go back and look to see when those opportunities took place, and we can talk about what we need to do. Because I know there have been opportunities for board members and specifically facilities committee to have some conversations, but let me go back and look.
I've not been aware of it.
Yeah, we had a facilities committee meeting of the whole. We had all kinds of people.
But those meetings were all about the agreement around the 145 property, then moving the property forward, right?
And we had meetings about traffic and the 400-foot long traffic queue and the traffic light and the timing of the lights all along from the R5. And I mean,
in this meeting. No way.
Again, there's been so many different that you're stretching my memory.
I've forgotten a lot of things in my life, but I don't forget that.
I mean,
I was called corrupt about it in public, because we had these meetings. I mean, like we've had many meetings that, and if they weren't, I know there was a meeting that was also then shared with the board about this took place and opportunities for board members to come look in the plans, and you came into my office to look at the plans several months ago.
But that was a part of agreeing to the 145 property moving forward.
Right.
Right. So the 145 property moved forward, right? With the township said 145 is going to move forward. I explicitly asked that those old traffic studies, that the school district should be requesting those old traffic studies be redone.
But we had explicit things that we had asked for and that we had said that we wanted to see, that we received and got as agreements as part of what we want to see with traffic, with the extended queue, the turning,
that was
the lights,
part of the,
all of that.
Okay. So
there have been discussions, there have been, again, let's go back and look, but there have been many discussions.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just a matter of a misalignment of what you're looking for versus what has been presented, but I think at this point, personally in the meeting, we can all benefit from getting a quick refresher about what it was that you're looking for to specifically to before we redo it.
Because I expressed, so let me use the I in this sentence. I expressed concerns. I think the stuff that was around the frontage of the property, like when we looked at their plans, which were the older plans, I don't know much had changed. It was all in terms of the agreement of the school district in terms of us going along with the 145 or not objecting to the 145 property plans, right? So we did. I came in, I looked at the plans. The things that are immediately in front of the building, the driveway, the traffic light, the queue, I agree with you. That was all part and parcel in the discussion around the 145 property and us not opposing it and the agreement that we made with 145, right? But there are other things. The traffic light down at the end of King of Prussia Road and Route 30, we asked explicitly what was going to happen there and to bring that back to this committee for discussion.
They're timing all the lights on 30.
I'm not talking about timing, I'm talking about widening of the road. The township had proposals in front of them of widening King of Prussia Road. They can. Widening King of Prussia Road at the base.
There's a PennDOT drainage swamp on the one end and our playing field on the other.
That's my point. But that was on the table with the township with regards to future enhancements that they would make around dealing with the traffic. I also, because I expressed a very specific interest in us understanding what they plan to do there. It's not on the Penn plans, because it's not part of Penn 145 development. It's part of the what happens to the infrastructure that else has to be done up above, below, left and right of that property.
So would it make sense to take this offline just for the sake of being able to get the
Yeah, I wanna get into
information
the
today?
agenda tonight, but-
And you have a list of questions and see what those specific questions are. If they haven't been answered, I'm sure they'll be answered, but let's find out what the specific questions are offline. if that
Right,
makes
and they're
sense.
well beyond the 145
It's
specifics.
about the whole new PLO.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. It's not about the 145 property per se.
Yeah, because
It's about everything else.
keep saying that, but it's about the whole PLO.
So that's why I'm trying to get clarification. It's not around 145
It's about the whole property,
specifically.
it's about the whole.
It's everything that's going to be surrounding us
Yeah.
and what they're planning to do about
Like,
those
yeah.
things.
Okay, so,
Because
We can
they
do that.
are having those
Yeah, we can add
discussions,
that to the
that's
list of-
part of their planning commission discussions, and we need to have a seat at that table. It absolutely impacts
Add that
us.
to the list of-
We can add that to the list for future meetings to look at and to see, and then we can,
Sorry, I didn't mean to
that's
confuse
all right,
you.
and I think, you know, Mike can reach out, you guys can talk, and I'll sit there and talk, we'll find out what it is the pieces are, we'll look at in the future.
Got a whole discussion about the whole thing.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, you guys are. How are you? Good evening, everyone. Dr. Boyle and I are happy to be back, and as we presented a couple months ago in regards to the elementary enrollment and building usage, this is kind of an annual review. We've done this in the past every year to somewhat look at where are we for the next coming school year. And as I'll reiterate our recommendation from the last meeting, that basically we felt like we are in good shape for moving forward for next year in regards to the enrollment and with our building usage. But a couple things just to bring up, just a reminder of our procedures and process of how we follow through with our enrollment numbers. We do look towards the beginning of August as to the cutoff date of looking at number of sections, number of students in a class, following our class size guidelines of the 21 in K-3 and 25 in 4 and 5. We do that for the purpose of, especially now, we used to make it where the cutoff was later in August, but because of the hiring practices that have been in place now for the last couple of years, with the clearances and the time that it takes to mail out all the, I'm going to forget the Act 168s, and getting a response back for this, you need more time than you used to. So that's the reason why our cutoff time is a little bit earlier in August now, at least at this time. And basically, you know, again, looking at our guidelines, Michelle, if you would just go to the page that shows, keep going, it's our boundaries, keep going, one more, sorry, this page. You know, just a reminder that our guidelines in regards to Radnor are the lowest in the area. We are comparing ourselves to other districts, not just the Delaware County, but surrounding districts that are comparable to our district. And our guidelines are on the lower end, and in talking with other districts, we do hold true to our guidelines where others may be more flexible in that piece. But what we're here tonight is to look for the committee just to provide, you know, as we move forward, we're going to be looking at the 1920 school year, starting obviously in the late fall, and for that planning. So we want to make sure that we're accounting for all the efficiencies that need to be in place to make sure that we are maintaining our enrollment and the use of our buildings and how they should be properly used. So we come to you tonight to find out if there's any area that you want us to move forward on in looking further into the efficiencies or learn more information.
Yeah, last time we looked at these, I expressed it, there were heads nodding from all the parents out there. Radnor Elementary School has too many kids in it, period. The building is being used in ways now that it was intended to be as short-term expansions, i.e. every one of the pods, which were intended to be general educational spaces available for temporary expansion when we had bubbles, are now all completely utilized with classrooms at full capacity and beyond, really, right? That building, though, the three-party agreement does not explicitly
Right.
say we can't have more than 535 kids in the building. But that building was really designed for no more than 535 kids in the building with the classrooms, the formal classrooms as they currently existed.
Prior to the POC classrooms.
Prior to putting those rooms in the middle. And if you talk to those parents in that school, it is absolutely, we have to do something about it. Now, you know, this is really no different, and I think the last time we were here, you guys said that we were gonna get an update from the Pell study, was one thing that I thought we were explicitly going to see if we can get an update.
Can I respond to that?
Please,
So
yeah.
So I reached out to the Pennsylvania Economy League.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, they had a number of retirements that occurred all at once, and they were unable to provide us with anything in a swift manner. I recently had conversations with them, and they're still struggling with finding individuals to take on. So I have reached out to a couple other different demographic companies that local districts have used, but it would be a late summer, early fall timeline.
And I think the thing I worry about the Penn study, right, is largely based on birth rates and like some other esoteric, I'll call it, things. Not that they're not real, they're real.
Right.
But they don't take into account massive changes in sales, you know, property sales. They don't look at that kind of
Correct.
stuff, right? So we probably have more realistic data in terms of the people that are interested in our schools at this moment in time, probably on the lower end, right? And we could take their numbers, but I don't think we really need their numbers to do a fair analysis of what's happening in that building. And Ithan, as you know, is on the lower side now than it was. I don't know that it's underpopulated, but it certainly is on the lower side of where it was, and we added 2 more classrooms. So I really feel strongly we need to do a real hardcore evaluation of the 3 buildings.
Well, and maybe this is something then that should go to the full board for discussion with goals as we develop, because I think the question at hand, you know, for me coming in and looking at the buildings and looking at the study that was just conducted, you know, we can program next year and we're in good shape to program. For me, I'm not convinced, you know, is Radnor overcrowded? I'm not convinced it's overcrowded if we compare it to our other 3 buildings, and I'd be curious to learn. I guess the piece I would want to understand is by taking that pod area and adding a classroom, and we chose to do it with permanent walls when we did it.
No, they're temporary. They were temporary walls. That's what they are.
Well, they're not all. I mean, I would say when you put up sheetrock, they're not necessarily all. I wouldn't call them temporary, but but they can come down. I mean, they're 2x4s, and it was maybe cheaper to do it that way. But whenever the district decided to put those walls up, however many years ago, we did that. And then the question is there still is a lot of space in that pod area for meetings, and I would question whether there still isn't as much equal space or more space than Ithan, for example, has, or Wayne, for example, has. And I really don't know the answer to that. And maybe that's something that we need to talk to the board and look about before I can jump to that conclusion that we're overcrowded at one versus the others. I would want to understand that space, because, and I was just in teaching last week, the 1st grade class over at Radnor Elementary for half a day. I didn't lose anyone and no one cried, so that was a good thing. I did forget a student in the nurse's office, but that's another story. But but I would, just from my perception of being in the building, that the space in the pod area still, if there's a lot of space, as I would jump to when I'm over at Ithan, that it actually seems like more space, but it might not be square footage wise. I don't know the difference between the class size. So maybe that's the next piece of information before we could sit here and say one building is overcrowded. Yes, we have, you know, we have a building that was built to a certain size. We added rooms in certain places. We're using 2 of those 5 additional rooms right now.
Right. Kindergarten and 2nd grade.
Kindergarten and 2nd. They were created, you know, in theory, we could use 5 of those 5 extra rooms. We're right now only using 2 of those 5 extra rooms for an actual classroom, but they were created for those bumps. The question is also there's many parents who might shake their heads who want to look at the overall size of the building there, there's as many parents that might be shaking their heads saying, we'd rather be for a year in that extra classroom than to be redistricted. So I think what we need from the board is some direction, and we need to talk about what are those other pieces of information we want to learn about to understand that we're saying we're good to program for next year, but do we want to set this up as a goal to look at? Do we want to maybe, Patty, looking at the square footage would help me with your question? Would that help you with that question, or no? Looking at the square footage? Does that make sense?
I'm all about data.
Okay.
Data decision making is the best possible decision making.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell you that there is a history that should not be ignored, how the building was originally built and intended for use. We had the same exact problem and the same exact complaint from the Wayne Elementary School parents when we took over their middle pod section, and we ultimately added an entire wing to Wayne Elementary School. After 4 or 5 years of parents coming with pitchforks, they got that riled up. If we want to wait until we get to that point, great. But I highly recommend that we create a real input stream for those parents at Radnor Elementary School. Not with loaded questions, just open-ended. Tell us what your experience is in the building. How do you feel about what's going on in the building from your child's perspective? Parents, I think, cue in immediately around class size. This is not about class size, and I think we need to state that very frankly at the beginning of this. Don't get afraid that we're going to increase your class size if you make comments. This is about us understanding the use of this building and whether it's practical and appropriate. And it's not just about the classrooms either. It's about all those extra spaces. What are we doing about art? Like, I remember when we bumped out those classrooms, we actually put art on a cart because we could not get all the kids in through the regular art room. We had the same problem at Wayne until we added in the space. So I struggle knowing the history of where the building was designed for, being here through that process, and all 3 of my kids going through that building and practically living there as PTO parent, and knowing what it was like, and now walking through that building, it is transformed, and it's not right. And I think we need to hear from the parents if you're not gonna, if the input that you're hearing from a few board members is not sufficient, because I can tell you there's at least one more. Ms. Dunn is also one of the people who will tell you that building is in dire need of some serious attention. Not because it's falling apart, and not because we can't program there, but because what's right and what should be done with the use of that building. And we added space to the other 2 buildings. So Radnor Elementary School is now the highest population? Highest population.
Yes, they're up by maybe like 10 students compared to Wayne.
Okay, but remember where it was when we built the building.
Right.
We were sub 500 when we opened the building after redistricting, and we were around 535, 525, 535.
Yeah, somewhere hung around
when my last kid left
mark.
that building, and now we're up at 586. It's a significant increase. So sorry. Amy, thank you for letting me go, because I think I don't know I could have kept my mouth shut.
Andrew, do you have comments?
Sure. Just to go to the numbers, a pretty interesting thing to think about. Percent change is important because then we get away from just gross numbers. 18.3% Radnor from 2015-16 to 2021. There's some projection in there. Percent change Wayne from 15-16 to 2021, 5.4%, and percent change Athen, 4.6%. So again, 4.6, 5.4, 18.3. So there's, we're talking about a fairly, not statistically significant, I'm just saying important or significant difference between percent change across those 3 schools. And overall, while I have the floor here, just quickly, I think it would serve the community very well to do some kind of study, lowercase s, but a focus group study or some kind of input study, some kind of forum, yeah, something, to just get a sense from parents about their experience in the school, their sense of things, but also some kind of audit perhaps, or some kind of study of how the space is used. Since the last time that we talked about this, I've actually been looking at academic literature on the effect of architecture and the use of space on learning. And actually there isn't that much that has been done on that, interestingly enough. But I have a really nice literature review if anyone is interested in and hitting me up for that literature review.
Very short lit review.
A book club.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that we could explore here, and I think within our parameters, and it's good that we're talking about this.
I think also something that would be beneficial is to look at the factors of why like enrollment would increase in certain elementary schools, like whether it be like more houses available on the market in that area, or like a spike in public school enrollment versus private school enrollment in this area, because I think that's irrelevant to, like, I'm guessing you would be like talking about redistrict or not district, but like is that okay? But if this year is, or like if a certain like span of years is just like there's a baby boom or something, you know, I think that we should look at those factors before we like say that this is overpopulated, because in like 3 years it could be Wayne, there are more houses for sale in Wayne, and then more kids are in that district, so, or in that area. So I think that's something we should look into. Good points.
Excellent. I think.
So, go ahead. Did you have something?
Just it's an excellent point, and I also think that I don't want to. I'm hesitant to go there, but there is a certain nearby school district that is going through a debate right now about the placement of. So I think that these are issues that are very relevant to us, and the fluctuation, I think, is a very important issue.
So just 2 comments. One is a request, and that is, in preparation for this meeting, I wish I had known that we were going to be reviewing the March presentation, just because I didn't know how to prepare for this, and I like to be prepared. So I'm just maybe requesting on future agendas that we could have a little blurb. I think we do this on policy, that gives us a heads up about what, even if the presentation isn't ready, a little context for what we'll be discussing, because I would have gone back and rewatched the March meeting and looked at the notes that I made on my March paperwork, because if you're asking us for any additional suggestions, I don't want to waste anybody's time with repeating a suggestion that I made, and I would have brought those notes with me. So just a request going forward to please give us some sense of what's going to be discussed, especially in the absence of the materials.
And that was not on Dr. Barczyk and Dr. Boylan, that was on me, the change. And that is because there are competing, I think, inputs and concerns. We're trying to understand the questions from the board members, and what direction do we as a board want to move, and what information does the board need more in order to develop a direction for this. So I think we need to talk about what other information does the board want to have on this matter, and what direction we want to go. Clearly, for the fall, Dr. Barczyk laid out, Tony laid out how we're going to move forward for the fall, unless the board has suggestions for a change. But the fall is upon us. We believe we can schedule, and we can schedule well for the fall. We believe our budget is in the right place. We believe the capacity, we will be in a good place. Again, recognizing that we still have the 2 classrooms here or there. We always have something pop up in different places. The long-term question is, what other data do we as a board want to look at? What other pieces do we want information on? And how do we want to move forward on this topic?
Right, but I think, Ken, even having that question on the agenda to say, are there any other things you need besides what you asked before, would have been helpful, because I would have gone back and reviewed what we had asked, because I do think we asked in March for some very specific things. I don't remember what they are, because I didn't know that's what, I was waiting for this like brand new presentation, so I apologize. I feel unprepared, and I don't like to feel that way, but that would be my request, to avoid that for everybody going forward. The other thing I did want to touch on is that Andrew's point, which is that I've thought about what's going on to our neighbors to the left of us, west of us, east of us, wherever that district is, east of us. And I don't know the complete backstory on that, but it's made me wonder if there might have not been the interfacing necessary between the commissioners and the school district, because the commissioners issue building permits, right? So in the criticism that the district has taken in terms of not doing appropriate long-term planning, and who knows if that's really true. As I said, I don't know the backstory, but if it's a matter of not knowing what's coming out in front of you, one of the ways to get that, besides from a survey company, I imagine, is having conversations with your commissioners, because the development of the township, I think, is due to some extent, if not a large extent, on the permits that are being issued to developers. So if we know what the township is doing in terms of giving those out, we might be able to augment data on what's going to happen with population in our community. So like I said, I don't know the backstory on Stoneleigh, but the first thing I thought of was, let's learn and not let that happen here in Radnor, and maybe that kind of interfacing would be helpful as to get the kind of data we need to avoid something like that. I'm not a real estate planner, but that's, I wanted to put that out there as something to request in terms of if you're asking what else are we looking for, that would be something perhaps, if it's reasonable and appropriate, to look for.
So I would suggest that if any committee members have a list of stuff they're looking for, and you've made a list here, that you email them to Tony. Or Tony or Tranya, or someone, is there a third person?
No, that's good.
I'll be happy to do it. I'll just rattle them off real quick.
Sure.
If Pell's not available to us to the point about birth rates, or, there's certainly enough holistic data out there available in the world around us about what's going on if there's any kind of birth trend. A specific parent study of parents at Radnor Elementary School specifically, to get their direct feedback about their experience with the building, reminding them that this is not about increasing class size. Eliminate that specifically at the very beginning. Number of classrooms in each of the buildings that are formal classrooms, like as built in, not temporary. Classrooms that are used for classrooms. Number of classrooms that are temporary. Number of special rooms, so whether it's music, art, gifted, whatever it needs to be, a number of those rooms that are used for those purposes and what they're for in each of the buildings, so that we can do, because overall square footage does me no good if the hallways in Radnor Elementary, which are much wider than any of the other buildings, counts towards square footage of the building doesn't.
I think we'd have to identify, I would add square footage to that, we'd
You
have to
can.
identify what it is.
Yeah, you could certainly do it by the numbers.
What's at that point, Wayne Elementary,
Yep.
when the full day kindergarten in there, it was like, oh, the square footage is fine. It's
Right,
like, yeah,
exactly.
My kids take a gym and cafeteria.
Exactly.
Right, yeah, you gotta be careful.
The real estate study from the last 3 years, what parcels have been sold in what parts of the community. We should be able to see what the parcel numbers are and be able to map it onto a map. We probably could get that from a realtor. Quite frankly, the township may have it. Well, they may or may not. Not if it's just for sale. Not if houses are just for sale without any, the township may not have that, but certainly realtors would. The last 3 years, what does the real estate turnover look like and where? Because that may help to show us, I think, what's ending up happening. My personal perspective is there's a lot of bigger houses around in the Radnor Elementary School, and I think you're getting more families that are coming in with more kids. That's what that's part of what I think is happening.
And just my own observation in this community, a lot of flipping going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of
older generation moving out with flipping houses and newer generation coming in.
And then the new construction stuff in terms of what the township has approved in terms of new construction, which that list is, I think, fairly short, pretty specific.
That has not changed much.
Those are the things that I would like specifically to have us actually come back and use that to drive data decision-making around this problem, or this current situation, whether it's a problem or not. I will try to back off a little bit and let you get some data.
Okay.
Situation of concern.
Can you just remind me, you said the plan for the fall. The plan for the fall what is the plan for the fall?
As is.
To have school.
To have school,
Okay.
to have school, and then.
So basically,
to have
we're
word
over
answer.
there.
But then, we will do what we did last year, we'll be looking at our class size recommendation guidelines and make that decision on August 1st, as we look at the elementary staffing.
Okay, thank you. I thought there was some novel plan for the fall that I had forgotten since we last talked about this. Okay.
No,
What I forgot, there's one other thing I would add to the list, is if there is any services that are being provided on some sort of mobile cart. I we probably have eliminated all of that, but I'm just to be 100% thorough.
Just quickly, is there anything on, just to make sure, some kind of assessment, just to recap from what I said earlier, some kind of assessment of space usage, some kind of audit of what space there, because you guys mentioned it, I might as well just throw my 2 ducats on this one, that I think the hallways, I think there's some space to put some storage in. Just thinking out loud here, but some alternate use of the hallways, because they are quite wide. And I think there could be some kind of usage of the hallways to create some more space in the learning areas, perhaps.
Linear.
Yeah, there you go.
Just to go back to Amy's question, last year, and then we plan to this year, we will program based on that no higher than number. And then we'll use that August 1st deadline, as that piece. I think the piece to also look at it, which becomes interesting, is to look historically as well, what that, and we have it up on the screen now, what that no higher than number means to us each year, and what that, when it comes August, we can look at it and say, what are the decisions that are going to be made August 1st? We're obviously watching it right now very closely. We watched it closely in the development of our budget, but we're going to also, we can look back last year and say, at that decision time, what did that mean? What did 1 or 2 students, and in what places did those students arrive? Similar to, I think, what Meredith was saying, look at where those students are arriving from and why, but then what that causes us. When does one student create a new section, a new teacher? Is it 1 student? Is it 4 students? Is it 5 students? That could be a piece of that as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, was this asked, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but the square footage of each classroom relative to the number of children in it and teachers in it, building to building? You know what I mean? So if you have a 500, I'm not the mathematician in the room, but if you have a 500 square foot room, and in one school, for every 500 feet, what portion of that from school to school has children and adults in it?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So
and I think we could, let me help. There is this sense out there, and this could all be accurate, I don't know for the square footage, that when Radnor was built, that because it was large pod areas were built, that the rooms were built a little bit smaller. And that may be accurate, the actual classrooms were built smaller. I think in the square footage, it'd be good for us to understand what is the actual square footage. We know our class sizes, we know where we make the cutoff, but so I think we'll know the number you're asking, the students, but what is the square footage of a classroom compared to from Eichmann, Wayne, and Radnor Elementary? What is that pod area, if there's an equivalent of a pod area? What is that square footage? What is the square footage of all the situations that Patty listed about, the different types of rooms too that are used? I think we would then compare that type of square footage. Does that answer your questioning?
Yeah, I think so. There's just a number, a derivative number, which is the square footage per student from school to school.
Yeah.
So
in classroom.
In classroom space.
But I think it's going to be more. I mean, I want to be careful that we, I think that's what we're getting to. I mean, it will be interesting to see what is the foyer square footage and what is the hallway square footage, and let's have that. But let's also not be confused. I don't want a foyer footage to influence a classroom footage. Is what I'm saying.
No, and I think that's what she's.
That's what you're saying.
Oh,
I think we gotta break it down.
In a classroom, you
Yes.
know, one student in
Yes.
Hythen Elementary, there's 20 square feet per
Yes.
student. In
Yep.
Wayne, there's 30 square feet per
Learning
student, that
space
kind of thing.
learning space square footage per student.
Yes, but we will use our class size guideline because it will be a variation each year depending on, sometimes we will be at the max in one building and other years one student will show up, we divide it up and it's different.
But what if the max varies based on the square footage per student? Like one room can, in a healthy way, fit that 25, And in another building, it can't. You know, you're really compromising a certain amount of square footage per student from one building to the next.
Why don't you just do square footage at what is our standard, 21, forget about who's there now, but at the number of 21, and then whatever that max ends up being when we go over, or whatever that.
Right.
Correct.
Yes. Perfect.
And we'll do that per classroom because each classroom, there are different sized classrooms throughout the building.
Yes.
Whether it's first grade classroom, fifth grade classroom, and they all vary.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So I believe you've got your set of diffusing marching orders.
I think we got it.
No, I think we're
We're
good.
good.
And if anybody has any other questions for these guys?
Yeah, please email us and let us know. All right?
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, what I'm saying.
So, new business. That's about 45 minutes worth. Anybody?
Mine was the traffic discussion, and we're gonna talk about it offline.
Cool. All right.
And I think that was a good discussion from the earlier piece, that it's really that whole area piece. It's not necessarily, the board has had up the discussion right in front of the property, but it's the larger traffic implications we want to circle back to. We can talk about.
And I just want to be clear, from an offline perspective, we're only going to talk about what we might consider bringing back in front of the board for an open discussion. We're not having offline discussions per se.
No.
It's just agenda planning.
Agenda planning for the future. Yep.
Thank you.
But I didn't want it to be left out there that the board hasn't weighed in on the turning lanes and those pieces right in front of
145.
145, right. I didn't want that impression.
Yeah, fair enough. I needed to clarify that.
So is there any public comment having to do with anything that was actually on the agenda tonight?
I would just like to reinforce the importance of your facilities study, and also to note that there is going to be, and thank you, Ms. Booker, for mentioning, there is going to be some training, I believe, on Thursday night at the Township building on open meetings and right to know, which I think is something that every elected official needs to be kept abreast of to keep us running safe and sound. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Gail. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, Gail Morrison from 111 Poplar. So I am a West parent. I do have some feedback, input on this discussion on enrollment. So I have my points written down here. The Pell data, I was a little surprised that there was kind of continued discussion after you discussed this at March, when the presentation seemed to show that it was very inaccurate. In one case, they were 50 kids off for rest. They underestimated how many kids you would have added there, and overestimated others. So it's kind of surprising that somebody along the way didn't say, well, no, let's not use them again. I agree with Patty. You really, it seems, do need some very serious census data, some house by house data. I'll tell you, on my 2 blocks of Poplar, North Wayne that go to West, we have 16 kids under the age of 6 that are headed to Wayne Elementary School. So that alone, you'll start to bump the numbers. And West, as a West parent, West is very crowded. It is bedlam in all school events. So I don't want anybody to be left with the impression that West does not have, like, you should see when you have an all school event and the parking situation is total bedlam. We were doing one, and then Little League was trying to come in, and little kids were almost run over. People were battling and like blocking each other into parking spots. So this is important to me, and what it relates to, I think, that I want to bring up is, I agree with Roberta when she says look at this very seriously and don't take redistricting off the table, because it has troubled me for years, the academic differences among the 3 schools. West always is much lower than the other 2 schools on the school performance profile type metrics. I think there are unacceptably high numbers of kids that are not proficient in reading and math at West. So if there was a different balance of populations going to the schools, would it help? So I really, along the same lines of the turnover that Tony talked about, the influx of new families with younger kids heading into the schools. There's also denser development. They're going to add 10 houses on Maplewood Avenue, right? People were going to townhouse and condo like they did right by the farmer's market. Those people also head to West. The ones at Eagle Road, you know, there was forest and now there's 6 houses there. So I do think that you're not on top of your data for enrollment, and we have issues to address at West. So those are all of my points. The other thing I will say is that I remember when I started at West 4 years ago with my second child, the number was 602, 603. It's now 580 because you have had departures to private schools because students' needs weren't being met. So I think there's issues to talk about at Wayne Elementary School.
Thanks, Gil. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Judy Sherry, I just make a quick point here. Back in 2001, 2, 3, I sat through meeting after meeting hearing about the glorification of pods. Pods were supposed to be kind of a panacea for teams, which were sort of cocooned around the pods. The purpose of the pods were for collaboration. They were to give all of the different classrooms an opportunity to get together if they wanted to at some point, or have individual smaller groups meet in the pods. The pods were in no way considered classrooms. They were supposed to facilitate the team approach to teaching. And the other thing about pods is that they really have caused the buildings to bloat in size. So when you look at the middle school, which is a pod school, and you look at Radnor Elementary School, part of the size of that building is because of the pods. And again, they were never designed for classrooms. They may be used now, but that wasn't their intent. That was a whole philosophy of education. And believe me, I heard it meeting after meeting after meeting, that the old way of setting up schools where you had traditional hallways was outdated, and this was the new way of teaching. So, just to reinforce that.
Hi, Dan Webster, 242 Ravenscliff. When you talk about doing a survey of Radnor, you might consider expanding that to all the elementary schools so nobody feels disenfranchised. I don't know what the questions would be that would be asked, but it also might help you get better data because people know it's not oriented just towards Radnor Elementary.
That's a good point. Anyone else?
Sorry, I have a question about just like a general thing. Do we, when students leave elementary school, like leave the Radnor like school district in general, like to go to private school or to move away or whatever, do we have like some type of survey like about like why they're leaving? Or I mean, I don't know if that's like a privacy, like infringing on their privacy, but like, because if we could do something like that, I think that'd be beneficial to the conversation we're having, because then we could see, like, are they leaving for private school because our schools are too big, or are they just moving away and that was, like, coincidental? So I think that would be an interesting thing.
I think that's a great idea, Meredith. I know there is some conversation that does happen at each building level when kids leave, and I don't know how formally we track it, and that's something I'd like to look into, because even the comment that, you know, our numbers are down because we're busing kids to another location, I'm not sure that's accurate. I can't sit there and say that off the top of my head that that's the reason. It could be the normal ebb and flow of, or it could be kids choosing private school, or it could be just we always have bubbles and then we have areas where we don't. So I think that's a great suggestion.
It's, just so you know, that's called an exit interview or an exit strategy or an exit survey, and lots of organizations do it. That's a good point.
Anything else? All right, seeing none, we'll adjourn.
No, I guess.